topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask Good Questions podcast, broadcasting live every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY Radio at W4CY.com. This week and every week, we will reach for a higher purpose in money and life, as well as a focus on health and wellness. Now, let's join your host, Benita Bell Anderson, as together we start with Asking Good Questions.
Hey, welcome to the Ask Good Questions podcast. I am so glad that you're here today. And man, have we got a guest that is going to turn you upside down when you think, when you're thinking of money and monks, believe it or not. So with that, I want to get going because we got a lot to cover. I'd like to invite Doug Lynam to the podcast stage. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Doug. This is kind of a really interesting thing. His career path has been wilder than what he calls a roller coaster designed by Salvador Dali on a sugar high. From the Marine Officer Candidate School, I want to know somewhere in here, I want to know why you left that, to 20 years as a Benedictine monk, before emerging from monastic life to become a financial advisor and a business coach and a keynote speaker and a best-selling author. He's got 2 books, From Monk to Money Manager and Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery. I'm getting a lot of M's in there, Doug. With now this is with the Enneagram, which he's going to talk about. Revolutionizing how we understand our relationship with money. This is, in my 25 years being in the financial advising world, behavior has been one of the biggest things that I've seen. He's also got a popular TEDx talk that has had over 400,000 views. His insights have been featured on CNBC and the New York Times. And he's now a financial advisor with the Innovative Advisory Group. And his unconventional journey earned him a private audience with Pope Francis in 2022. And established him as a leading voice on the intersection of wealth and meaning and purpose. So anything to add to that, Doug?
Oh, that's a pretty good start. I think we just get going with that.
Yeah, I would say so. Well, you've lived like 3 lives, Marine and the monk and the money manager. What's the through line? What is it that's connecting all of those 3 things?
Oh, wow. I guess the through line is, I guess, a life of service, trying to find different ways to live a life of meaning and purpose, and trying to find ways to, I think those deeper philosophical questions of, why am I here and what's it all about? I think curiosity is probably a through line, and then adventure is another through line, and then just always looking for that way of using my talents to serve others.
So let's begin with the whole Marine thing. You were on your way to becoming, you were in the Marine Officer Training School. So what happened there?
Oh, it was great. I had a blast. I graduated, taught my class, and was thinking about making a career out of the Marines. I finished my training, and then to be an officer, you need to have your training completed, and you also need to have your college degree. And I still had a year of college left. So they sent me back to school. So I kind of a year pause to sort of sit and think about this a little bit, about what I really wanted to do with my life. And I kind of realized that unresolved anger issues and high explosives were probably a bad combination. So I didn't need to go blowing people up around the world because of my unresolved emotional issues. And, I left the Marines because I thought, well, if I'm going to leave this life, what would be a higher calling? What would give me the structure, the discipline, the esprit de corps, the camaraderie, and maybe a higher sense of purpose. And that's when I, of course, yeah, as any self-respecting person would do, is go off and join a monastery. It was a great way to flabbergast my parents. They were really, really great way to rebel against how I was raised and annoy them immensely, which I did a good job of doing over the years. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. But at any rate, so that's kind of how I got into the monastic life, and was really looking to escape the world of money and materialism forever. But obviously things took a bit of a turn.
Well, you were there for 20 years?
Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, wow. Well, when people hear from monk to money manager, that seems like a contradiction.
Right. Well, I guess what I learned in the monastery is that money and spirituality aren't separate. You don't need to divorce yourself from the two. And that in fact, when you reject money for the wrong reasons, it can be as unhealthy as being greedy and avaricious for the wrong reasons as well. So they're just kind of two sides of the same coin. And that, we have a lot of biblical admonitions against greed and wealth, which are understandable. But when you think a little more deeply about it, and you understand maybe even the historical context in which some of those statements were made, then you kind of has a little more nuance to it, and realize that actually when you reject money completely out of hand, then you disempower yourself, and you're giving up one of the best tools we have for love and in our world. And so you can't
make impact.
Because a couple of years after I got to the monastery, what really kind of turned things around for me is our community went bankrupt. And so after the monastery went bankrupt, somebody had to sort that mess out. And I was the most junior monk at the time. So I kind of naively raised my hand to take on that project. And, I couldn't do a worse job than my predecessor. So the bar was set pretty low, even though I was financially illiterate at the time and really didn't know what I was doing. But I got in there and figured it out and realized I had some skills to be of service. So that's kind of how I started off into my financial journey.
Wow. Well, it was just kind of like the universe put you where you needed to be.
Yeah. And yeah. So you can't feed the hungry or clothe the naked or heal the sick without some money in your pocket. And
that's right.
What I realized in the monastery is that, we were all smart, well-meaning, well-intentioned people with good hearts, but we had these, what I call money monsters, these negative attitudes around money that really disempowered us and put us in a deep financial hole and prevented us from being able to really be of that tool for love and service that we were called to be. There were so many people we wanted to help, so many things we wanted to do, but we just couldn't because of the financial constraints that just felt like you're shackled and handcuffed, because you can't do anything in a modern economy without money in your pocket.
Right. And what the scriptures actually say, it's the love of money. It's not, it's behavior. It's a behavior that is the problem.
Well, yes. And so I actually have a whole chapter on that in my first book, From Monk to Money Manager. And when you dig into the Greek, it turns out in ancient Greek, there's 5 different words for love. And so what we're talking about, the love of money there, is a very avaricious kind of love. And without boring your audience with a linguistic lesson, I'll just say there's higher forms of love, what we would call in Christianity agape love, and how do we bring that higher form of love into our money? Because maybe as a philosophical thought experiment, regardless of your faith tradition, like whatever your sense of the divine is, like, well, if I can use the God language for a moment, like, where is God not? Like, where is and so how can God not be in our financial life and be in other parts of our life? It doesn't make any sense that we arbitrarily divorce those two. So it's really about bringing a higher form of love, not because we only have one word for it in English, and it doesn't translate well. And so it isn't just the love of money, it's that greedy, avaricious kind of the Ebenezer Scrooge mentality towards money that gets us in trouble.
Wolf of Wall Street type.
Exactly.
So what do you think is the most common money struggle that you see that doesn't have anything to do with math or budgeting?
Well, that's a deep question that goes back to the Enneagram, which we can get into. But the simple answer is there isn't a simple answer. It isn't like there's one thing that we all universally struggle with. it really depends on our personality type, and our personality structure determines how we kind of view all of reality, but then also determines how we relate to money in healthy and unhealthy ways.
Wow. Well, as I've been reading your book and thinking about this, I went through this terrible divorce about 25 years ago, and I did a really good job of self-sabotaging myself financially.
Right.
And now I can look back at it and I can just see all kinds of, that was all wrapped up in emotions and my psychological state of mind and everything. It was really interesting. So with that, I'm thinking, let's get into, you're talking about sacred wounds.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could define what's a sacred wound, how do they form, and why do they show up in our finances?
Do you have a sense of your Enneagram type by chance from what you've looked at the book? Or
I knew you were going to ask me that. I didn't
have to know.
I didn't get to it yet. I'm going to, but it's good.
Well, maybe we can dig into you a little bit. Maybe we could do a little armchair coaching
Okay.
and figure out your money monsters, and that might teach your audience a little bit about how the system works.
Yeah.
So to your question of the sacred wound. So the way it works, and so what I've really tried to do, so the Enneagram, for the audience's members who aren't familiar with it, Ennea in Greek means 9 and gram means drawn. So Enneagram is a big fancy word for 9 things drawn together. And what they represent are the 9 sort of archetypal personality structure, ego defenses that we can have. So if you think of a color wheel, if you take a circle and you think of a giant color wheel, you can basically divvy it up into 9 quadrants. And then our personalities sort of fall on a range somewhere in each of those quadrants. And so the way it works is your personality has a lot of parts to it. And the Enneagram doesn't explain everything about who you are, because you have a nature component, your DNA, but then you have a nurture component. And so the Enneagram helps explain the nurture part of your personality, how your childhood environment shaped your ego defenses that allowed you to survive the biggest threats and the biggest challenges that you faced in that childhood environment. So it's a little complicated. I'll try to get too technical with it, but essentially think of it like this. When you're born, there's a physical umbilical cord that gets cut with a sharp knife, right? And then you're physically separated. But we form what I call an egoic, a psychological umbilical cord that forms between us and our caregivers. And that egoic codependence allows your parents to do most of the driving of your ego in the formative years of your life, because you're just not really sure what this reality thing is yet. And then you enter into what we call the individuation and differentiation stage in childhood, where you begin to separate from your parents. And that psychological umbilical cord has to be cut. And unfortunately, just like the physical umbilical cord, it has to be cut with sharp negative emotions, because positive emotions would reinforce that connection back to your caregivers. And it's typically gets cut through the way boundaries are set around us in our childhood, the way we receive the no's, don't touch the hot stove, don't kick the dog, don't bite your sister. There's some boundaries saying that it has to happen. And that's the basis of what I call your sacred wound. And so those boundaries are often set through have to be set through negative emotions. And we know from the work of an affective neuroscientist by the name of Jaak Panksepp, and what he discovered, many years ago, is that in all mammals, there's 3 core negative emotions, and it runs off the limbic system of the brain, the brainstem. And so all mammals are running off of all the negative emotions are off of these. I call them the big 3 negative emotions. That's going to be anger, grief/shame. So grief or shame. And then the third one is going to be fear. So think of anger, grief, and shame, or anger, grief, and fear are those big 3 negative emotions that we encounter throughout life and in childhood that do the cutting of that psychological umbilical cord. So if you're going back to the color wheel metaphor, if you think of a circle and you divide up into 3 big chunks, you've got the anger quadrant, you've got the grief, and then you've got the fear quadrant. And then we can divvy those 3 sections up 3 more times, because when we experience those negative emotions, we can process them in one of 3 ways. We can internalize that pain, which is kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie. You can externalize that pain, which is like having a food fight with the world, or you can have both at the same time. So there's 3 core negative emotions, 3 ways to process them or deal with them. And that is what gives us these 9 archetypes of personality in the Enneagram. So that is your sacred wound, is how that psychological umbilical cord for you got cut. And then the punchline, why do we care about all that, is basically because from that wounding that's happening in a sort of pre-conscious stage, it creates your greatest unconscious fear. This is the fear, whatever fear that wounding creates is then kind of becomes the chassis of your ego. If you think of like your car you're driving in, it's the shape of that chassis that you're driving through the rest of life in, that your ego is trying to protect you from.
Wow. This is awesome. I mean, you're making me think of all kinds of things, and I'm sure everyone that's listening is doing the same thing, thinking of the different things that have happened to them in their life. What do you think are a few classic signs that somebody's money behavior is being driven by a sacred wound? The thing that I mentioned to you probably was then.
Yeah, well, let's see if we can maybe diagnose your type, and then people can follow along and maybe figure out their type as well. They'll kind of give a little sense of it, because we probably don't have time to go through all the 9 types. It's quite complicated because inside each type is an infinite amount of variety, and there aren't just 9 types. There's subtypes and subtypes, and it goes down and down. So there's a lot of customization, if you will. But just maybe take a moment if you're listening, and begin to do the same. Is think about your child, think about your teenage years, your 20s, and even now, because as we age, we mature. Our type, it's not a static system. We do mature as we age, and hopefully grow into a healthier relationship to this stuff. But when you were younger, and even now, in your darkest emotional moments, which emotion do you tend to feel more of? Do you tend to feel more anger? Do you feel more grief/shame? Or do you have more fear?
Well, I'm thinking of things that happened to me in my teenage years, that anger.
Anger. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're in the anger triad, then there's 3 ways, again, we can process that anger. We can, if you externalize it. So I'm going to give you these 3 choices to think about and see which one, if any of them fit you. So they have numbers. These are in the anger triad. There's 8, 1, and 8, 9, and 1, and the numbers don't mean anything. They're just placeholders, but so they're not signify any value. So type 8 has their sacred wound of anger that they've externalized, and they have a deep sense of injustice. But what it does is their anger is sort of, I use car metaphors because I think it's helpful for people. And so I think of type A as, we call them the challenger, or I call them the Humvee of egos, because they're always sort of pushing against the boundaries and limitations of reality around them, because their greatest fear is being harmed or controlled. So they're kind of the take charge. They like to be at the top of the food chain wherever they are, and they have this need to kind of combat against others instinctively as a way of self-protecting. So we say for type 8, their idea is that the best defense is a good offense. So they're kind of the challenger, or I call them the Hummer, because they can kind of run over obstacles in front of them very easily, but they tend not to be very fuel efficient with their opinions. So, for example, like Donald Trump is not to be political, but he's a classic example of a go-get-it type, hard charging type 8. And so is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. These are both examples of 8s. So that's one choice. See if that strikes you at all. And then we'll jump over to type 1. And now type 1s, they take that anger and they internalize it. They direct it at themselves versus out at the world. And what that does is it creates their greatest fear of being bad or defective. So they have this strong inner critic in their head. It's always telling them to be a good boy, be a good girl, do it right. And we often call them the perfectionist or the improver. They can always see the flaws in themselves and other things very easily. But I call them the BMW of egos, because they're sort of precision engineered, but they take a fair bit of maintenance. So those are the two choices. And then in between the 8 and the 1 for on this color wheel is type 9, and we call them the peacemaker, because they have this internalized anger at themselves for not really being able to meet their needs in childhood, but then this externalized anger at the world for not really meeting them either, which they're always sort of tamping down. The greatest fear for an 8, it's a little weird. We say it's a loss of wholeness. It means they're afraid that if their anger ever came out, it would erupt and kind of blow them apart. So they kind of go along to get along, to be very easygoing, very peaceful, loving people, but they don't like conflict because they're afraid that it would cause their anger to erupt and really, could cause damage to themselves or others. So that's what we call them the peacemaker. I call them the RV of egos because they kind of like to chill out, and hang out at the campground sometimes while the world's passing them by. Did any of those strike you as possibilities?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I know that there's been a lot of, not wanting conflict, in the being out of control. The teenage years, there was some things that happened around me being not in control at all. This had to do with some young men, and just being really, really angry about what happened. And then, so I think that, it translates into, a divorce, after 25 years of marriage and feeling smushed into the ground, and again, no control.
Yeah.
And just wanting to, so, when I think of myself, it's like, I've always wanted to, I want to be the best that I can be. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I think about, like the stuff the really upsetting things that happened in my youth, I never told my parents.
Yeah.
Never said anything. I was too ashamed, and I was too mad, and I was angry, and it was scary as well. And I never said anything to anybody.
Yeah.
Just, and like you said, tamped it down.
Yeah. So you probably don't get angry very often, but when you do, is it pretty explosive when it happens?
Yes. I'm pretty even keel.
Yeah.
I'm pretty, and most of the time, but if something happens that and it doesn't happen very often,
right.
But yeah, I can see that.
So more in the 9, you think you're more in the 9 category? Does that resonate?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. So then if you're a 9, then what we say with so then to add more complexity to an already complex system. I've layered on top of the Enneagram what I call the attachment theory of money, which is identical to the attachment theory of relationships, just applied to your finances. And so what it basically says is that there's 2 kind of core unhealthy ways that we might relate to money. One where we're anxiously attached to it, right? That's kind of, again, the Ebenezer Scrooge, or the if you think of the show Succession or Billions, people whose anxiety around money and need for it is so high that it creates suffering for themselves or others. Or you can be avoidant around money, which sounds like maybe you had some avoidance issues in your youth where you're sort of unconsciously pushing away or self-sabotaging your financial life because because of all the negative emotions it brings up, you don't want to deal with it. You tend to find ways to basically not take responsibility for your financial life in some meaningful way. And so each type expresses that anxiety or avoidance in different ways, and it shows up in different areas of our financial lives. So most of us aren't just all one type of anxious or avoidant. It might show up in like different areas of our financial life. So there's what I call the 4 pillars of finance. And the 4 pillars of finance are going to be earning, saving, investing, and giving. So earning, saving, investing, giving. So we might be like an anxious earner where we want to make a lot of money, but then we might be an avoidant saver because we spend it all on stuff. Or we might be an anxious investor, but then an avoidant giver. So there's we can mix and match these, but the money monsters for type 9, I call them the spud and the dud. So the spud is sort of the financial couch potato. They don't want to deal with the conflict that their financial life is creating. So they kind of they treat their financial life kind of like the treadmill in the corner that they never get to. It's there, but they sort of neglect their financial life in a kind of just through avoidance and ambivalence. Or sometimes with 9s, what you see is what I call them the dud. And that's the one who they care about their financial future and they want to take appropriate action, But because that fear of conflict or that anger is driving them, they sometimes run around in a flurry of activity and they do a lot, but nothing much ever seems to happen because they're never getting to the conflict that they're avoiding in the first place.
Right.
So spuds and duds is one are the types for the 9, and I don't know if either of those resonate with you.
No, but well, actually, I'm gonna go off in a little bit different direction because I'm noticing in 25 years of advising people, I've many times noticed that a spender will marry a saver.
Right.
The overspender and the underspender, and it seems like, don't you think that they will attract those different personality will attract each other?
Well, opposites do tend to attract. So you see that in relationships, and you see that in financial lives as well,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
But so
well,
maybe we didn't get your type right. Maybe, so the 9 isn't hitting with you. It's not resonating.
I don't know. I think I think what you're wanting, I'm feeling like I want to delve into this in great depth. I want to find some time because, maybe in some ways, but I'm also feeling like, God, I could be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And you already said that.
Right. And so it's a color wheel, right? So there's you could be a 9 closer to a 1 or a 1 closer to a 9. So it sounds like 8 isn't your type, I don't think. But maybe something you said about being good that struck me as meaningful. Like you're always trying to do it right.
Yeah. And I mean, like the whole thing with financial advising, I went into that, like I said, about 25 years ago, and somebody had actually said, you'd be good at this. And I was.
Yeah.
And, the nurturing and just working with people and trying to help them,
Uh-huh.
that always resonated with me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if you want, so those who are listening, you can go to my website. There's a test you can take. So doing an armchair analysis of someone's Enneagram type is fraught with difficulty. It's not easy to do. Sometimes you nail it, and sometimes you don't. So I'm still sort of. Can I ask you maybe a different question? Let me just take
Sure.
a different approach with this. Okay. So this goes back to we say each type has a worst vice. So I'm going to give you 3 choices and see which one of these is okay. So for type 1, their worst vice is actually anger, right? It's that anger that when things aren't done the right way, or things the people in their lives aren't treating them right, or they tend to have a problem with maybe resentment can be an issue for them, and anger kind of erupts more forcefully when there's a sense of frustration, maybe is a way of putting it. And then for 9s, what they really struggle with is a kind of sloth, an inability to take action or to really.
I'm an action taker.
Okay, so then you're not a 9. So that's not the 9. And then with 8s, we say their worst vice is lust, which doesn't necessarily mean sexual lust. It's a lust for intensity. They like things really. They like an intense kind of response in life and in the universe and in general, and see if any of those strike you more.
Nope.
Well, then
I
maybe
think we're going to have to table this, I think.
All right, we'll table it and we'll come back to it. But it's a curious question, so I'll keep it in the back of my head here as we move forward, and maybe something else will strike us, and we'll get a little deeper into it.
Yeah. Well, another question for you would be, what would be a simple way that listeners could start identifying their own money wound? And, because typically you're not going to have a therapist in the room to help you with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got a whole book on it. So I would say check out Taming Your Money Monster. It takes some time to learn the system and to identify your type, but there's some good tests out there online you can check out, and take about an hour to sit there and go into much more depth of questions that will pinpoint it.
What do you think about willpower? I mean, I feel like most people are just, saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And a lot of times willpower-based budgeting just fails for so many people. It's just just doesn't work.
Yeah, and so a lot of it just goes down to what is the emotional wound that procrastination is trying to protect? What is it
Yeah.
that those emotional what's the emotional root cause behind it that makes you feel so anxious when you're sitting down to do your budget or sitting down to pay your bills?
Right.
And to really identify those negative emotions and where they're coming from so that you then have a way to move forward with it with a little more grace. And there's so each type, there's in the book, I lay out all the practical steps that you can take for your type. What are the actual exercises that you might do? They're going to move you through some of this anxiety that you're having more readily. And so you can confront these fears and name them and then identify them and see them when they're coming up. So you know when you're reacting out of guilt or fear or shame or anger, whatever that is, and then some practical, real spiritual tools for overcoming it.
Mm-hmm. Well, if somebody feels like they've tried everything, right? What would be a small shift that you'd recommend that would really start taking them down that road to more clarity?
Well, I think first of all is naming where you're stuck, right?
Yeah.
And then what's the smallest, simplest thing you could do and are willing to do and can do, whatever that is, even if it's just opening up a budgeting app for 5 minutes, even if it's just opening up those bills that are stacking up on top of your desk.
Yeah.
What's the smallest, simple step that you're willing to take and could do right now, and do that and start there? It's sort of the 1% rule. Do 1% better today than you did yesterday. You don't try to tackle all of it all at once. Gets so overwhelming. We just get flooded with it. It's such a huge monumental task.
Right.
But it's that, so taking that first little baby step and then trying to stack that onto another step tomorrow so that you can actually, cover some mileage.
Right. I think the key word is willing,
Mm-hmm.
being willing. Right. So which one of the Enneagram patterns tends to struggle most with avoidance?
Well,
Because you talked about
I
all
mean,
of them.
it's just the avoidance shows up in a different So the avoidance pattern can show up in any type, but it manifests uniquely for your type.
Okay. So I want to take a little side tour here.
Mm-hmm.
How in the world did you get an audience with the Pope?
Accident.
We're gonna take a little breather here and let people digest what you've been talking about. I want to hear about the Pope story.
Oh yeah, that was fun. So a good friend of mine, his name is Richard Rohr. He's a famous Franciscan priest and a best-selling author. And it was his invitation actually, and I was just pushing the wheelchair. So, but I did get to go to that private audience with him, and it was an awful.
He was in a wheelchair, and you were pushing the wheelchair.
I was pushing the wheelchair. I was. We had to go all the way. He had to go all the way to Italy. Obviously, we had to go to the Vatican.
Yeah.
And I was his traveling companion. So that was, so it was an honor to be asked to have that role. It was a real gift. And it was a real honor to fill that role. So it wasn't for my work that I met the Pope, but I did get to meet him and have that private
So
time.
what was your feeling coming out of that meeting?
Awe. Like I was just a little starstruck, a little overwhelmed because we were in the papal audience. There's different levels of places where the Pope meets people, and one sort of like I want to call it the throne room. That's not the name of it, but it's like there's different diplomatic levels of where you can meet, and there's like the big hall, and it's all when you go to the Vatican, you see the Vatican museums, you're just seeing a small slice of what's there, and the whole Vatican is like the Vatican Museum. And so you're seeing artwork that nobody else really gets to see very, very often. And, the little papal guards are there. So I was just struck by this is Pope Francis, by his kindness, by his humility. I was struck by his warmth and just how gracious he was the entire time. So it was a really spectacular experience.
Wonderful memory.
Mm-hmm.
So let's switch gears again. You've mentioned money monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell everyone, what are they? How do they differ from normal financial mistakes?
Well, again,
money monster sounds like something big.
It is. It's that deep-rooted psychological pattern that's holding you back in some area of your financial life. It's that emotional wound. It's going back to that sacred wound we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
It's a deep unconscious fear that you have that's driving you, and it was helpful in your childhood to protect you, but now it's kind of driving your life into ditches in some very critical ways. And
Right.
so understanding what that root fear is, that's like, what is that, when all these negative emotions around money come up, what's the fear behind that fear? Essentially, what's that deep fear that it's triggering, and how do you address it in a healthy way so that you can alleviate it through compassion, self-compassion? And there's, again, real tricks for that, but it's knowing what that, naming it, and then being able to move forward through it with a little bit more grace and dignity.
Mhm. You know, I'm going to tell you one other thing. But as you're sitting here talking, I'm thinking, thinking about me. When I was getting ready to, I've written a couple of books like you, and there was one point where I was like, well, I actually had another financial advisor, this one from Los Angeles. I was at a luncheon, and he says, no one's ever going to listen to you. You're an older white female.
Mhm.
And I went, I was like, what? And so actually I told this story because it was like, I can't believe that somebody actually said that to me. But this other very wise woman said, well, he's saying, no, you can't, but why not you? And then the same thing when I had been contemplating doing a podcast for a while, and that I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, all that sort of thing came up. And I thought back to that initial stuff around writing books. And it was like, well, why not me? I think I have a lot that I can share.
Yeah.
And so I think that Money Monsters, one that I think that came up for me after the divorce was not being worthy to have any money. And so that, probably, what I think one of the reasons why I've been successful in doing financial advising is because I've been able to hear a lot of the things that I've gone through and have empathy, right, for people.
Yeah.
So, if you were going to name the top 3 money monsters, what would you say they might be?
Well, again, there isn't a top 3 because there's 2. Again, there's 2 for each Enneagram type, and so it just depends on what your type is. And so
Right.
so basically there's 2. You probably have 2 that you're likely to struggle with most, and you can also have a healthy relationship with money. So it doesn't mean.
Well, I feel like I have a very healthy relationship with money now.
Yeah, but before it was rooted in not feeling worthy of having money.
Yeah.
I'm not worthy of it. And where did that come from? Where do you think that sense of not being worthy comes from? And does it show up in other parts of your life?
Not really.
No?
I don't think so. I don't know. Boy, didn't expect to be digging into my psyche today.
Well, because you said it sounds like there's a pattern, though. You didn't feel worthy to start a podcast.
Yeah.
You didn't feel worthy to have money. Was there other places where that sense of unworthiness has showed up in your life?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
How about in school? Did you feel worthy of? Did you feel?
No, I mean, I did. I was a good student. Came out of college magna cum laude. I mean, I worked hard to get the education that I had, and I've got professional designations. Worked hard for those. So I don't know. Maybe maybe part of it is just proving myself.
Yeah. And have you always felt the need to prove yourself?
Maybe.
Okay. Do you? All right. So, yeah, I'm sort of shifting my. I'm stuck on my armchair diagnosis here a little bit.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Because it's so curious. Because there's also things called counter types. So for each Enneagram type, there's also a counter type. Those are very hard to pin down. But if that sense of worthiness was a thread, I mean, do you feel that in relationships? You talked about your divorce. Do you feel worthy of love?
Oh yeah, absolutely feel worthy of love. Yeah. Yeah. Those, wow. I can see where this gets really, really deep
Uh-huh.
and really insightful. I think you almost need to go away to a cabin in the woods somewhere for the weekend to think about it.
Yeah. And when you find your type, you kind of know it because it makes you cringe. It's kind of like sitting on a cactus for the first time.
Hmm.
It's usually a very uncomfortable experience when people finally do land on their type, because it's like, oh my gosh, now I see all the patterns. It's like someone just handed you the script of your life, and you see why you've made some of the mistakes you've made. And it's a bit cringeworthy sometimes.
Well, the interesting thing about, what I've come to with being an advisor is the whole thing around purpose
Hmm.
and having a purpose for money. And I can see where this can be really helpful to help you identify
Yeah.
um, just, your four pillars: earning and saving and investing and giving. I can see where those can get distorted if you have some things that you haven't worked through.
Right. Right. Um, Yeah. So you said, so there's 18 money monsters I've identified, because obviously there's 9 types, so 2 for each. So we got 18 to play with. And again, the Enneagram is a very complicated system. So there's overlap between types and all kinds of cool ways that we just
Right.
have to go into. But I think that was the real insight in the monastery for me, was just seeing, people taking a vow of poverty, thinking it's going to bring them to a level of spiritual enlightenment, when in fact it was a kind of ego-driven renunciation of money. Like, there was this one monk, I call him Brother Pius, and he refused to touch money or cash or credit cards for any reason. He thought it was going to pollute the soul. And I was like, okay, well, he thought that was going to propel him forward spiritually. And what it actually did was give him this sort of unassailable perch to kind of look down on everybody else and kind of create a holier than thou attitude at times. And it's like, well, wait a minute, this isn't diminishing your ego. This is actually strengthening your ego.
Right.
And so to realize that these money monsters can really take hold in ways that are subtle and hard to identify if someone doesn't point them out to you. Because
Right.
if his not touching money was somehow kept his hands clean, it meant the rest of us had to touch money a lot more often to make that happen, which was hardly loving or kind if his hypothesis was correct.
Right. Wow. Super cool. The I I'm just thinking of all the different personalities that I've worked with over the years, and um, most of the time there's something that people don't want to hear.
Hmm.
And like, now you're working with high achievers and wealthy clients. What would you say? And we're running out of time too. What's a truth that you feel about money that listeners need to hear?
That money is not the root of all evil. Money's pretty much the root of everything, good and
Yeah.
evil. And it's a
And it's a
tool.
tool. It's
It's
a
like a
tool.
hammer.
It's a
It's like a
great
hammer.
tool.
You can build something beautiful, and you can whack yourself on the thumb. So
Yeah.
anything that's powerful is going to be dangerous, but it's also like, you can use nuclear power to build a nuclear reactor and light up a whole city, or you can use it to blow up a city.
Right.
Take your pick. But that doesn't mean we should be afraid of energy. It's just
Right.
it's a really powerful form of energy for getting stuff
Right.
done in the world. So I think we're trying to help people. I want to empower people to have more of it, so that they can live a life that makes their soul sing and live their highest purpose, and really be a tool for love and service to the world.
I think that's a great way to end, because we are out of time. And just one thought, for me, having, struggled through a lot of this, and now, on the other end, things are great. And getting to serve this mission in Hawaii, there's a whole lot that you get out of being of service to other people.
Yeah.
I've just noticed that, and just working with the people here and everything has just been great. Well, to end, let's say that was what you just said was just a great way to end the podcast. We we're out of time, but I hope that this has given people a chance to really think about asking some good questions about why they're doing what they're doing. right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say, look at how you're doing things, and information about Doug and his process will be on the information on my website, so that, so you can go look him up.
Yep.
And take a look at this, because I think it's going to do nothing but good.
Thank you. Yeah. So I encourage people to check the book out, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. You can find it booksellers everywhere, of course, Amazon. If anyone likes it, post a review. That'd be great. And if anyone would like some financial coaching or needs some help with their finances, reach out to me on my website, DougLynam.com.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks for being here on the Ask Good Questions podcast. We'll
And
see you next time.
You ask great questions.
Thank you.
Today's episode is over, but we did ask good questions again, didn't we? Don't miss out as we broadcast live every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY Radio at W4CY.com. Join Benita Bell Anderson next week for more conversations with experts on finances, retirement, behavioral finance issues, health and wellness, and more. Until then, remember to ask good questions.